Good Sunday morning. All right. Okay. Good morning. Hi, everybody. It's all right. It's all right. Good morning. Yeah, all right. Last week, at the beginning, we took an imaginary journey. Just thinking back to things we've heard over childhood in particular, we took an imaginary journey to imaginary kingdom, thinking about this young man and to go beyond those walls, what we might see, what we might experience, what we might hear, but even more importantly, what kind of questions we might ask as we try to hunt down what we do, what we should act like, figuring out who this king is, because life in a kingdom is lived by the rules of the king. You know, in this case, without that, there is no king, and we don't step into a kingdom. Well, it's no different as we learned about journeying into another kingdom, though. One that's very real, one that's not a part of our imagination. This one led by a real king, one that happens in real life, one that Jesus talks about. He said that this kingdom is what he came to teach. It's what he came to make known. I mean, it's that important. It's not just something I mentioned it one time. No, it's something that he's talking about all the time, living out all the time. It's life in this kingdom. It's life in this kingdom that's lived by his rules. Without that, he wouldn't be king, but without that, we wouldn't be in his kingdom. It's that important. Life in Jesus' kingdom. We found out through some stories that Jesus told, we found out that it's costly and it's prayerful. It's costly and it's prayerful. Living in this kingdom of Jesus. It costs you everything you have because there can only be one king. It's not that you can't have anything. It's that the king will have his place first. Everything else will fall in underneath. But it's costly. Did anybody else get this in the mail this week? It's from Amazon. Anybody get this? I know one of you did. Yeah, it showed up. I think it means we bought too much or something. But I had to laugh. There's an irony. Amazon.com, you know, the mega online giant, they send a paper catalog. I just kind of had to laugh at that. As it's kind of like the Weather Channel sending you an old mercury thermometer and having it's just a disconnect. There's something missing, though. As you open this up, there are, all the pictures of the toys, a brief description of the item, and an item number, but there's something very significant that's not here, and it's the price. There are no prices in here. And I think, so are they free? No, they're not free. It's Amazon. We're out to help them. There's a cost with these things. It costs a lot to have these things. And that's so it is in Jesus' kingdom. It's not free. And when there's an element of it that's free, the price has been paid. That's another sermon for another time. But on the other side, it's very, very costly. It costs everything you have to follow Jesus. Nothing else takes the place of the king. Everything follows in below that. So we learned a little something from Amazon. I wish I had that last week. I wish they just sent that out just a week sooner. It's costly, but it's also prayerful. And it needs to be because it costs us everything. The king wants to hear from us. And we really need to talk to the king. So life in this kingdom where Jesus is in charge, it's costly and it's prayerful, we found out. But that's not all. There's much more. That's what we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks as well as this week. But that's also good news. There's more, and it's good stuff that we hear. To understand it, though, we have to see it through the experiences of life. We have to understand it through that. We might say it's learned on the road of living. We might say that it's happening in real time. It's ongoing as we speak. We've talked about this. Kingdom's not something for later on. It's something being lived right now. And our King, we can't forget the King in all of this. He knows life in this place. He knows life in this world. And it's those situations that he spoke to. It's those situations that he spoke in the midst of. So we want to see it lived out in the life of the king. We can see this lived out. He's not speaking from up here while we're experiencing down here. Oh no, the king lived here. He lived here with his subjects for a time. He's not speaking as one who's indifferent or one who's like, I heard about that. No, he can say, I know, and he knows, because he too was in real time. So while here, while in this place, he told some stories. He wants to help us understand about the kingdom. And a lot of the stories he told are about the kingdom, and they're also about life lived in the kingdom. Go to Luke chapter 7 if you want to follow along for a little bit this morning. Luke chapter 7. Before he tells a story, I want us to see what's going on in the life of Jesus. What is it that prompted the story? What is it that's going on in Jesus' life that we're going to hear a story that will help us as we live our life in this kingdom of Jesus? Luke chapter 7, we'll start reading at verse 36. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. Again, Luke, one of the four that are telling us about the life of Jesus, about the ministry of Jesus, and about the stories that Jesus is telling. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. When one of the Pharisees, one of the religious leaders, invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Imagine for a moment that your backyard dinner party is not going quite like you had planned. That person who's always walking around the neighborhood shows up. You know the person. They're always walking around. They won't make eye contact with anybody. And they're carrying something, a bag, and you always kind of wonder, what's in the bag? They dress differently than the neighbors. In fact, they're usually in the same clothes every time you see them, that same sweater, that same jacket. Now they've walked between your house and your neighbor's house, and they're softly crying while they're at the feet of one of your guests. They pull out some, what a few hours ago would have been freshly picked flowers. You can even smell them from your side of the patio table. Uncomfortable yet? Yeah. And so is everybody at this little party, this homeowner's party, this homeowner that Jesus was invited to attend. And the only one not uncomfortable there is Jesus. Verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner. We don't see this in our English Bibles, but the original language here, the way the Greeks put this together, it would say, if this man were a prophet, which he's not, then he would know who and what sort of woman this is, but he doesn't. That's how it would have read. The homeowner knows Jesus isn't anything special because you don't let people like this woman get that close to you and do those kind of things for you or with you. And then Jesus explains that the homeowner is wrong on all counts. In fact, Jesus tells a story. Verse 40. Jesus answered him, Simon, we'll find out the man's name, not Simon Peter, it's a different Simon. Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You've judged correctly, Jesus said. And then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You didn't put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. What just happened? The king just taught something about the kingdom. He just explained about life in the kingdom. And what is there to learn? Well, the kingdom life is forgiven. Life in the kingdom, what does it look like? Well, it's costly, it's prayerful, and to that add, forgiven. The kingdom life is forgiven. Simon knew the rules of the world. He knew the rules of his town. He knew the rules of his house. Rules like, if someone's different, ignore them. If someone has something bad in their past, don't forget it. If someone has something bad in their present, ignore them and don't forget it. If someone isn't like you, you don't have to deal with them. Rules like this have always existed outside of God's kingdom. They still do. These are rules that we can get our head around. But Jesus didn't come to enforce rules outside of God's kingdom. He came to pass along how to live under God's reign. It's not about rules outside of God's reign. It's about the rules under God's reign that Jesus is explaining. I'm not trying to do away with all of these. I'm trying to help you understand these. Life under the king. Life with the king. Life as the king did. And life in that kingdom is the forgiven life. The forgiven life. And the story that Jesus tells helps us to understand a little bit more about that. It's no wonder Simon didn't forgive. He doesn't need to forgive a lot. He's just needed a little forgiveness from heaven. When you think about who he is, what's there to be forgiven for? First of all, he's a man, and in that society, that counts for a whole lot. Now, he's a homeowner. That narrows it down a little bit more. He's a religious leader. Whoa, we're just getting a little more elite here. Well known enough that he can hold dinner parties. There are people that will actually come to his house to be there. Life's good. Forgiven? Well, you can say that, but even more, he might say, I'm blessed. I'm blessed. That could have been his thinking. And then this woman, she's known by everyone as the lady who, fill in the blank. We just don't know for sure. We can guess a little bit. A person with a past that raises questions, a person with a past that raises eyebrows, and a person with a past that when she shows up, it raises concerns. And in the kingdom, both of those people can find forgiveness, but one will understand it so much better. The kingdom life is forgiven. And that matters because the kingdom life is also forgiving. The kingdom life is forgiven, but it's also forgiving. The two go hand in hand. Join me in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus has some more stories to tell. Matthew chapter 18. When you get here, you'll find Jesus is already teaching those who wanted to know more about or who already were a part of the kingdom. That's his audience. He explained to them how to live under the rule of heaven, how to live under the reign of heaven. Now, it's not just a kingdom for later on. Again, it's a kingdom about right now. Not that there's not more coming. It's kind of like the now but not yet. But to be lived on the path that we're on right now. In 1815, Jesus explains how to handle problems between you and somebody else. It involves going and it involves talking. The opposite of what people outside of the kingdom say. They say, avoid the person, don't talk to that person. That's the rules that Simon was following with the party crasher lady. Just ignore her, she'll go away. When Jesus stops to take a breath in Matthew, Peter is one of the first ones to speak. Verse 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? It's a good question. Peter understands what Jesus says, but he's not sure how often to forgive the same person. Just help me resolve this a little bit. And Jesus tells a story. Verse 22. Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged. I'll pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him, began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I'll pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged. They went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. The kingdom life is forgiving. It's forgiven, but it's also forgiving. How can it be forgiving? Because a subject of the king knows that they've been forgiven. We can be forgiving because we know we've been forgiven. People stand before God with a moral debt that they can't even see over. That's us. Those who know about the rules of the kingdom, they can find forgiveness in Jesus. And that debt is paid. It drops down and it can't even be seen anymore. Forgiveness. The debt paid, the amount canceled, forgiven. God's saying it's taken care of. It's paid for. In that respect, it's kind of like this. There's no price. It's paid for. It's done. It's taken care of. Get whatever you want. What happens next? I'll tell you what happens next. We leave here. We leave here this morning. The singing's turned off. The sermon's done. We get back to life. And it's there then that we run into the people that annoy us. The people who cut in front of you, the people who don't like you, the people who want to use you, the people who don't talk to you, and the people you wish wouldn't talk to you. And it can be easy to forget then that we're subjects of the kingdom, that we have a king. It can be easy to forget how much we would have owed to God, what our ledger would have looked like. It can be easy to think that we're like the homeowner in the first story. We're like Simon, welcome, and I'm blessed. We can be like the religious person hearing the second story. And in both cases, the party crasher lady shows up. And it just seems to throw everything off. But then we remember the stories. The stories. The stories that tell us the kingdom life is forgiven. Oh, it's forgiven. And therefore the kingdom life is forgiving. They go hand in hand. One doesn't happen without the other. As you interact with these people, and sometimes even other people doing kingdom business, we'll live in a way that shows that we know we're forgiven and that we're forgiving. Mean words said to you, they won't matter as much because we've said mean words too. In fact, you're willing to go, as Jesus talked about, because the kingdom life's costly. Sometimes we give up and we go to that person and we talk because we all represent the kingdom. Hurtful words, they don't feel good. They never feel good. But you know that the person that said them to you actually needs to see Jesus, not see your angry response. And you know that you're living by a different set of rules. You're living by rules under the reign of God, not outside the reign of God. And people climbing over you to get to the top, they won't see your wrath, but you do pray, because the kingdom is prayerful, you do pray that they'll see a glimpse of your king, and something you say or do, that they'll see a glimpse of Jesus. Unresolved things from years ago, no, you haven't forgotten. We have this great ability to remember, and we love the ability to remember, especially when it's a loved one that's died or amidst some other type of loss. We're so glad we can remember. But with that also comes that other side of the sword. We don't forget things. Unresolved things from the past, not forgotten. But what you'll do is go. You'll go and talk, and you'll bring a word from the King. Bring words that sound like the King and actions that look like the King. And this is all part of the road we walk on in the kingdom. It's not an isolated event. We've got it. We're blessed. Thank you, Simon, for showing us. No, it's about now what do we do when she comes to the party, when he shows up at the house, when I hear this, when I've said this. It's on a road marked out by the King. Jesus traveled this road. He gets it. He gets it. What a Savior. Yeah, this Son of Man. What the King knows. And knowing that, he tells us these things because he says, I know you can do it. It's life in the kingdom. He's traveled this road and he said he forgives you. The King says, I forgive you. So will you forgive others? That's his question to us. It's his question to you and his question to me. Will you forgive? Will you walk this road that he's traveled? And that I would even argue he's still on with us. He left, he said, I'm leaving somebody with you, and the Godhead's all tied together beautifully. Will you walk the road he's on? It's like the King's highway. A road paved with and walked on with forgiveness. Because life in the kingdom is forgiven and it's forgiving. Let's stand and sing a song to that King together.